Hey, Earth Keepers. As we all know, sometimes it isn't easy being green, especially when it comes to sustainable, affordable, earth-friendly architecture. Remember the story of the three little pigs? It didn't work out so well for the pigs who built cheap houses out of straw and sticks. But what if it were feasible to build durable, eco-friendly buildings out of straw or sticks, or even corn cobs or wood chips? Our friends at Nomadic Earth Architecture say it's possible, and they want to tell you how. Welcome to the Earth Keepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earth Keepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. Welcome, friends, to the Earth Keepers podcast. Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you again as we consider new and challenging perspectives that can help us to be better Earth Keepers. I want to give a special shout out to our newest listeners from Austria and Ghana. We're glad to add you to the Earth Keepers global community, which now has listeners from over 100 countries around the world. Our growth worldwide has everything to do with you, so please keep on sharing episodes with your friends through email, texting, and social media. As our regular listeners know, a theme that we've returned to often in Season 4 of the podcast has to do with how younger generations, that is, Millenials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha, are responding to the climate crisis. To that end, we'll be talking now with Jesse Nathanson and James Sledge, two young changemakers who are passionate about teaching better ways to build. They're here to tell us about their global initiative called Nomadic Earth Architecture, an organization that is all about inspiring people to build their own sustainable, non-toxic buildings out of cheap, easy-to-find materials. James, Jesse, it's really great to have you on the podcast. Let's break it down a little bit. Nomadic Earth Architecture. Let's just start with Earth Architecture. What is that?
So it's basically using materials that you have readily available in your local area. Like ancient method of building has been practiced around the world for thousands of years using like adobe and cob. And it's just the dirt that's right below your feet. And you different types of architecture like domes and arches. You know, this ancient technology that's still used a little bit today, but not so much because we all want things done fast and it kind of takes a little bit of time. So it's an abundant resource that creates materials like rammed earth and cob. A lot of communities have been using it locally. Like if you go to Africa, they still use nature-based materials and stuff like that. You can use bamboo. It's not just earth. It's just a material that's readily available that comes from the earth instead of something that's synthesized.
So, Jesse, I'm wondering where the nomadic part comes in.
Yeah, sure. So I've worked as an international social worker and aid worker for a long time now. And I've noticed in the areas that I've been in the field, there aren't a lot of resources for really remote communities, not just building materials and support in that way, but just opportunities for people living in remote areas to make income, to connect with other communities, to have access to education. So Nomadic is the forefront of our vision of we really want to reach communities all over the world. Education should be accessible to all communities. And if we can learn to use our natural resources, the ones available right where we are, it's even more powerful and effective. So that's where that stems from.
Well, I'm really curious about how this particular set of methodologies for building is actually better for the environment. In what ways is it better?
So like if you use concrete, say like Portland cement, you have runoff and stuff like that. We use magnesium oxide. So with magnesium oxide, you can actually take leftover wood chips or ground up bamboo or hemp, and actually it'll petrify it and it'll turn into a stone. And now your structure is like a rock. And if you have runoff from concrete, that pollutes the streams, so on and so forth. So with the magnesium, it's a natural mineral. So here we actually are building in a pecan grove. And we've noticed that all the other trees around the grove, it's a real old grove that had a lot of vine growth and everything. And all of the other pecan trees, they're not in the vicinity of the build. They didn't bud as fast. And magnesium, it's a mineral that they use in horse feed and actually in farming, agriculture. You can actually use it as a top dressing. So we noticed from the runoff from where we're working, the two trees that are close by, they actually sprouted faster this year. They're growing faster. They budded earlier. And we also use magnesium sulfate, and that's widely used in fertilizers in organic growing. So actually everything that we've mixed at the end of the day, when we're rinsing off our tools, cleaning out the mixer, all that runoff, it just puts nutrients back in the ground. And so the materials after we build, anything that's done fell on the ground, doing like the finishing work, anything that's been grounded down, that dust that floats off, anything that it lands on, it's magnesium. And, it's a mineral that our body actually absorbs. Working with it, our body absorbs it. So it's a healthy mineral. It's good for the environment because it comes from the environment. So you're just replenishing the environment with magnesium.
Do you know something else about magnesium I've learned this year? Is it helps you sleep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I try this magnesium spray instead of melatonin because I do have insomnia at times, and it's just amazing, right? Just amazing how it works.
Yeah, I also suffer from insomnia. And the days that I'm out in the build working with my hands in the magnesium, I definitely notice a difference in my sleep.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to use gloves and stuff like that. It's a natural mineral. Like with Portland cement, you want to wear a respirator because it's a micron particle. You don't want to breathe it in. But working with it, touching, like the other day, I was actually plastering and some fell in my eye. And the only thing I had to worry about was the abrasive sand that was in it. Where other people working with lime or cement, something falls in your eye, you gotta go to the eye wash station. Then, you gotta go to the emergency room if it gets real bad.
And of course, cement just takes so much energy to produce and has such bad effects on the environment just to create the substance.
Yeah.
Not to mention the transport of cement or cement blocks in order to build cheap housing. I mean, in so many ways, it makes more sense, right? To build where you are with what you have.
Yeah, exactly. It might cost a little bit to get the magnesium, but if you get it in bulk, you're now cutting down on packaging. You don't have the individual packaging. So if you get like a ton of magnesium, and we found it readily cheap, you would think it's something that's very expensive, but it's not. It's widely available. The Chinese have huge deposits. We just found a processing plant in Canada that's sitting on a huge deposit. So it's not like you have to go through these huge extremes to get it. You might have to order it if you're in the area, but once you have your material there, there's a lot of opportunity. You can do water catchments with it. You can actually make pottery with it. It has a lot of uses, and it's good for the environment and everything that you're working around.
So it's the magnesium that actually makes it possible to add other things, right? Other cheap, already available components.
Yeah.
As you said, you're building a project with hemp right now. I think you mentioned cob as well, corn cobs, I assume.
Yeah.
But tell me more about that. What's the magnesium actually doing in conjunction with this other stuff you're using?
So the magnesium is pretty much a binder. We use a magnesium sulfate. So that's the actual binder for the chemical reaction. And it just petrifies organic material, where if you were to put organic material in concrete, Portland cement, it would just decay. And, soon you would have this void in the cement, and then the concrete itself would start to decay. Everything decays over time, and it would just speed up the process. But actually, the magnesium, you can use wood chips. There's a wide variety of organic material you can use. I mean, if you had to, you can use a lot of leaves. If you had a bunch of leaves and you soak them in, it would actually make a stone out of the leaves. It petrified, just like calcium. It calcifies like lime, but it petrifies it. And as it petrifies, it also sequesters CO2. So you're also sucking and locking in more carbon. So it's a carbon sink. So as it cures over time, it gets harder and harder, and the CO2 goes in. And so now you're storing carbon, taking it out the atmosphere. It's pretty beneficial.
Yeah. So, Jesse, talk about affordability then. I mean, some of it's obvious, right? If you're using materials at hand, that saves you a lot of money. But why is affordability a value for nomadic earth architecture?
Yeah, well, I think it's really valuable for everybody in the world right now. We have affordable housing as an issue for people all over the world, not just people that you would think of like struggling, either living on the street or displaced communities, but all people now are stressed out about financial security and homes. So I think it's a huge conversation that's happening not just in the natural building world, but in the community development world also. And I just think that there are better ways of doing things. And for us to continue to keep trying the same ways over and over, spending more money, spending more energy, burning up more fossil fuels, in so many ways, it's detrimental to our communities and the way that we're living. So to find a way to live affordably using local materials, like you said, not having to get transport, not having to get them from really far off places, I think is so valuable. And the earth is an abundant resource. Using things like adobe bricks or super adobe rolls, you're just using the earth beneath your feet. And that's something that anybody can afford. And the thing that we're finding out is a lot of people have a lot of knowledge about this. There's just a few missing pieces or missing resources or tools that they need connection to. And so it can really open up a lot of avenues for more affordable prices when you know what you're looking for and you know how to find those materials.
That's such a good point when you say that what people need is, for the most part, already there. But I think importantly, maybe one of the missing pieces is knowledge, is understanding how to do this. Even if a particular culture has a tradition of using earth architecture methods, it may have been lost, it may have been forgotten, it may have been dismissed in favor of more Western methods. So you guys are about education as well. Maybe that's even your primary aim.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we believe that education should be accessible to all people and all cultures. And there's a huge gap in that and on how we're sharing our tools and resources. We were just in Zambia last year doing a workshop over there. And it was so interesting to me. So everybody there uses cement. They're working in it with no gloves, sometimes no shoes. And you talk to them and you ask them about, do they get sick? Do they know about the toxicities? And they don't have any idea what you were talking about. For them, it's accessible and available and somewhat cheap. And that's that. They were never educated on any other alternatives or what it could be doing to them as they're working in it and their families living in it and breathing it in. So yeah, education is super important. And that's why we want to share the knowledge that we've accumulated over the past however years of us studying as students of natural building ourselves. It's so important, and it's not being reached to remote cultures and communities. And that's one thing that we're working to strive to do.
Maybe you could each talk about how you got involved in affordable, sustainable building methods, and maybe how that led to the founding of Nomadic Earth Architecture.
Well, I have an extensive background in construction. I've worked with an environmental company. I've done concrete finishing. And so throughout the years, I've always had to go and get certified through safety meetings and stuff like that. Working on military bases, it's protocol that you have to know the MSDS and what's in certain, whatever you're working with, you have to know all this information about it. They're upfront and they're honest with you, and they let you know, hey, this has chemicals in it that could be hazardous. This has chemicals. And throughout the years, I found out that a lot of our building materials were toxic. And so me and my business partner purchased a farmhouse that was built in 1913. It's a rough cut old lumber house. It was a farmhouse, the first one that was built in that area. It has no insulation, it's all hardwood, oak floors. So it's a pretty standard natural building house. So it's basic. It didn't have any insulation, and I wanted to find something that was natural to insulate the house with. And you could go, at the time they were talking about spray foam. The new hype was spray foam. Oh, if you're not insulated, get spray foam. Well, doing research, there's a lot of VOCs in spray foam. You don't realize you're encapsulating your house in a foam that's off-gassing and killing you while you're sleeping. I had a friend that was super sensitive to like all kinds of stuff. He's a real smart guy. He's a science guy. And we would always have these in-depth conversations about different types of building materials. So I started down the path of taking different workshops, trying to figure out how I could insulate my house, but make it cheap for myself, because you could get this stuff. It's an actual magnesium type of insulation, foamcrete. So it's a magnesium slurry that's mixed with a foaming agent, industrial foaming agent, and it blows it up, makes it real puffy. It dries hard. It's a puffed up foam, but it's super expensive. And I realized you want to do healthy, you have to have lots of money. Even with food, that's the name of the game. Unless you do it yourself, you grow your own organic food, you go purchase organic stuff, it's going to be super expensive. So going down this rabbit hole, I started taking different DIY workshops and stuff like that. And that's what led me on the approach of actually trying to come up with my own way of building and making it affordable.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, you mentioned the term VOC. What is that?
It's a volatile organic compound. So like aerosols, paint thinners, the paint you have on your wall, they all have some type of organic compound. And over time, these compounds, they actually break down, they decompose, and they put formaldehyde in wood and different types of other building materials. And over time, these materials, they actually off-gas. And a lot of people are super sensitive to these off-gases and don't realize they're cancer causing. And that's one of our mission statements, is to actually educate people on the building materials in their house, like how toxic they really are. Because I did a workshop with this guy, and his name's George Swanson, and he really keyed me in that his daughter passed away. They didn't know why she passed away. And after she passed, they did the autopsy, and it was literally the carpet in their house was off-gassing, and she was super sensitive to the off-gas, and it made her really ill and sick, and that's what ended her life. And so from learning all of this stuff throughout the years, I'm like, wow, people don't know about this stuff. And it's all around us because we look for a cheap, fast, easy solution to building, because there is a housing crisis, and it does take time to build healthy structures if you do it right. And so that's what kind of led me down the path to where I am today. Like, how can we make this affordable? How can we educate people on what their habitat is actually doing to them? You can go eat healthy food, work out, be super healthy, be clean. But at the end of the day, if your body is clean and you go into a house or dwelling that is toxic, now your vessel is clear to trap in all of these toxins. And people aren't educated on that. You think people that live out in the bush who don't use natural material, and we learned this in Zambia. I was talking to a guy and explaining to him about natural building materials. And it dawned on him that the people in the bush live longer lives. They walk around on the ground barefooted. They eat their foragers. They eat natural food. He was like, this is the reason why they live so long. And I'm like, yeah, they're not living in toxic dwellings every night. They're eating natural foods. And he was like, this is something that's downplayed in our country. We look at them as simpletons and the have-nots, when actually they're living healthy, long lives. And I'm like, yeah, it's just been misconstrued. This is the way you really want to live. Concrete dwellings and stuff, they're just decaying your body as they decay.
Yeah, Jesse, I want to ask the same question of you, but I do want to point out something that's been coming up again for me as I listen to you. and that is Circlewood, the parent organization of this podcast. We are in a project right now where we're trying to design affordable housing. For many purposes, we have 40 acres on an island that we want to make an education center. So we want places for people to live. But our hope is also that it will be an affordable housing option for anyone who wants to do this. So we're designing with a sort of modular approach where people don't have to do too much work or have to have too many skills to put it together. Yeah. But the further you go down that road to try to be healthy, holistic, connected to the earth, as you pointed out, it gets more expensive. At least in Western culture context, it just costs more money to live healthy, to live more connected to the earth. So that's another challenge that we're trying to overcome, is how can we do this in ways that match or beat the prices of standard construction? And then, as you pointed out, health issues are a big part of housing. And so we're also asking the question, how can we create these things out of materials that actually promote health? How can we build these units in ways where the aesthetics, the atmosphere they create is actually healing to people on an emotional or psychological level? So, yeah, when you start trying to build right, you realize how much we're getting wrong in our standard building practices. And it's a little overwhelming, honestly, for us as an organization. But yeah, we're grateful that we have really great construction folks and architects who have the vision and are doing the work with us. But I love it that you are taking this angle as well. It's really inspiring. But let me ask you, Jesse, how did you get involved in affordable, sustainable building methods? And how did it lead to your eventually co-founding this organization with James?
Yeah, so I didn't have a lot of background experience with construction or natural building. I've been an aid worker and a social worker for most of my life, and the pandemic hit, and I was forced to come home from the field, and I was working remotely, and James and I kind of reconnected and got in touch again, and he said he was going to Hawaii to become certified to be a instructor of aircrete domes. And since I'm working remotely, why not come and hang out? And so I went, and that was the first time I had seen a dome or experienced natural building. So it was really powerful for me to learn about it. But in that whole process, we ended up staying in Hawaii for a while, about a half a year. And we're part of the workshops and helping them get going, facilitate participants coming in. And I just started noticing all these things, like some of the people were talking about their arms were feeling like they were getting burned, or they were having sinus issues because they were breathing in the cement. So right away, I started to notice some red flags about using certain materials. And then I started noticing there were no local Hawaiian indigenous members in these workshops. They were all non-native people coming in from the mainland or from other countries. And you really get this feeling in Hawaii that the indigenous people are really being pushed out. Their resources are getting limited. They can't afford food. They can't even afford to grow their own food. And now I was seeing they couldn't even afford to take these workshops. So it was kind of like layer by layer, we were noticing the ins and outs of what was happening. And as I was starting to learn about natural building from James, the conversation started going of how we could bring more tools and resources to indigenous communities and remote communities, and how we could expand on our skills. So that's when we started living in the RV and working on different properties, learning about different climates and materials and being off-grid in remote places. And it just kind of snowballed. And I still kind of don't believe we're here, but we're here.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you just a follow-up question. Obviously, you were a student of mine at one time, and we talked a lot about social justice all the time in relationship to community development in particular. But I wonder what you have come to value in terms of environmental justice and how it intersects with social justice. How does Nomadic Earth Architecture navigate that intersection of environmental justice and social justice?
Actually, when I thought about this question, it reminded me back to your class where we learned the term intersectionality, which was talking about the deep level of vulnerability that communities are experiencing. It's never just one way they're experiencing injustice. At this point, where we are in the world with the climate, with housing, with displaced populations, with our health, it's all intertwined. You can't really separate the two. And like I was just saying, how I started kind of seeing the layer by layer of what was happening. It's the same with how nomadic earth architecture focuses on these two areas. You have this level of vulnerability that communities are experiencing. And I think it's critical to get the community involved, to not only go there with the intention to share what we have, but to, and I want to say empower, but I'm also thinking back to our class where I think it was you who coined the term co-powerment. We don't want to go in acting like we have the answers and we have the tools and you need us. We co-power each other to share resources. A lot of these communities have incredible skills already. They just don't have the resources to bring them to fruition like we can. So one of our goals is to kind of bring the power back to the people, that they can be a part of their own conversation, all to build a more just life for not only their communities, but for communities around the world. So I think when you talk about the intersection of social and environmental justice, it really is going to be rooted in how our communities can get involved and how they can be a participant of the redevelopment of their own communities and things like that.
Yeah, just for the record, that word co-powerment actually was created by me and my students, really. I mean, we had to have a word that was not empower, because empower doesn't always work in some situations. But the thing about co-powerment now is we're still learning on this sort of edge of environmental interests, that we're trying to figure out, what does co-powering mean when you talk about the community of creation, the environment around you? How do you depend on the environment and let the environment depend on you for well-being? It's something we're trying to tease out, that relationship, but there's something there that we really want to explore through the courses. But people like you are exploring that out in the real world. James, did you want to add anything about environmental and social justice?
To me, I feel like education is the key to social justice, because education is a wealth. If you have education and knowledge, you have wealth and understanding. If you can understand how to build your own home and to do a lot of these things yourself, that's social justice in my eyes. And yeah, the intersection where the social justice and the environmental justice, you can educate them and let them know that they're stewards of the land and not just inhabitants, and to educate them to take care of the land and co-power them with knowledge. Because a lot of people in my travels, they just don't have the knowledge. They've only been taught a little bit. And so if you give them the rest of the puzzle, they can go a long way, because then they'll spread the knowledge themselves, even if it's just to one other person.
Yeah, you really enabled them in some ways. You set them free, we'll say, to be the solution to their own challenges, right?
Exactly.
What they need, they have. And perhaps it's just a matter of setting folks free to see things in a different way.
Yeah.
And maybe to feel the agency that they can actually make a difference and don't have to depend on outside resources.
Yeah, they can just do it themselves and help their community. And, you know, if you can give a person some knowledge and they can go back and share it with their community, that's co-powering.
Exactly. Well, speaking of co-powerment and education, we're going to take a little break to hear about the master's program that we've been referring to, so stay tuned.
Have you been wondering if graduate school might be the next step in your personal and vocational growth? Do you know someone who is looking for a master's program that will help them transition to a career in social and environmental justice? You might want to check out the Masters of International Community Development program at Northwest University, a graduate degree that is mentioned pretty often on the Earth Keepers. My name is Vidya Chintala, and I am an ICD graduate myself. Being a part of this program has been transformational for me, both personally and professionally. The ICD program is for those who want to learn non-traditional, more humble, and collaborative approaches to transforming and strengthening communities, and to do so in ways that focus not just on human communities, but also on the whole community of creation. This 20-month faith-based graduate program is offered in 2 formats, either in person in Seattle or in a mostly online format that allows you to take courses from anywhere in the world. If you're at all curious, you will find a link to the Masters of International Community Development program site in this episode's show notes.
Listeners to the Earthkeepers podcast are interested really in how people got to where they are and are interested in stories. And so let me ask each of you, when you think back to some of your formative experiences in your life, what were some of the influences that shaped your commitment to earth justice or environmental advocacy?
So for me, social advocacy has been in my family. My mother, my grandmother, all social workers and aid workers. And so I went to the school and got my bachelor's in social work. And I remember this was kind of the experience that really just catapulted me into kind of the unlearning that I needed to experience in order to come back to the learning. But I was working at a government agency and we were supporting low-income single parents that were at risk of losing custody of their children. And I just remember the stress and the bureaucracy and the inauthentic connections, the burnout, the toxicity of that whole environment. And the social workers were burnt out. The clients, they didn't really care about what was going on. And I just kept feeling like there's got to be another way to support people going through hard times. This is not working for me. Of course, it's not going to be working for them. And I kind of was at a crossroads of how can I support people and be of service if this is what it's going to turn into? And so I completely went away from that whole life. I quit my job. I got out of my lease and I got a one-way ticket across the world to travel. And it was then that I really saw things in a new light. I experienced seeing communities really struggling and real hardship. But on the other side of it, I saw real solutions, alternative solutions that people were experimenting and trying new ways, and I saw it working. So I had this newfound idea of how I could be of service to others and work with communities. And that's actually when I came back to the US and I came to your program and got my master's in international community development. And it's kind of snowballed from there. So I think for me, it was the unlearning of traditional ways of doing things and realizing that you can kind of walk your own path, that we can all experiment in new ways, and that we can all lead a new path. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but at least it's opening up an avenue for new pathways to be made for others, at least.
It seems to me that what you're describing really is a story of maybe being transformed from someone who thinks they need to be a problem solver to more of a catalyst for people to be problem solvers themselves. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, definitely. I'm very privileged to be able to have had those experiences and to be able to have the education that I have had. And I think other people are really privileged to have their experiences, whether it's something completely different. And we all, no matter what, have something to offer in that conversation.
How about you, James?
I've done a lot of environmental work throughout the years, but the thing that sits with me most is I had the chance to actually sit with a lot of Native American elders at an Eclipse festival, and it was a One Nation event, and I got to actually just hang out with these elders and listen to their stories. And it was basically about how we're stewards of the land. I remember one elder saying, the people came here and they called our people savages, and all we did was take care of the land. We didn't go out and massacre the animals. We let the buffalo roam. If we were hungry, we took what we needed and only what we needed to survive. Then people came to our land and they taught us different. They belittled the ways we lived, that everything that we did was wrong. And actually, they taught us the ways that were wrong. And, that really stuck with me. And it's like, if we could just live simple and respect these people's traditions and their ancient technologies and their way of living and building, maybe the world would be a lot better place.
I think in some ways, the gist of the problem that we're facing these days is how we define steward. I think what I hear you talking about is when we talk about indigenous folks, they talk about caring for the land, but it's more about relationship, right? I mean, it's more about being in community with the land. It's much less of a top-down mastery kind of relationship. But I think the West, perhaps in terms of defining that word stewardship, I think we've defined it in ways that maybe separate us, that we are the caretakers, capital C, and that it's not only our role to take care of the rest of the world, but it's also our right to exploit it as we see fit.
Yeah, we don't find that symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a relationship is the key word, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think I'm heartened personally by opportunities to learn from indigenous folks who have the generosity and the grace to teach us, to tell us about alternative ways that we might go forward, alternative relationships we might have with the rest of the world. In this season of the podcast, we're paying particular attention to the points of view from younger folks like you, and to explore how your generations are dealing with the prospect of a pretty bleak climate future. Of course, many younger people struggle to have hope for the future, and for some, that even leads to despair. And it seems to me that the two of you have optimism that we can choose a better future. But let me ask you, what is your outlook for your future these days, and where do you find your motivation to do the work you're doing?
I think that my motivation and my hope is like a day-to-day kind of conversation I have with myself. Like everybody, I also am a little anxious to see where this world is going. But for me, where I find the hope is in the people creating and the people experimenting and the people trying to find new ways of a better life and a better future. So it's kind of like this wave that I ride. And sometimes it's motivation from my own personal life of what I'm doing and how my relationship is with the land. But most of it comes from this group of people that I've met through this whole experience of learning about natural building. These people are so creative and so innovative, and they're just keeping on trying these new ways. And that's so inspiring for me. So yeah, it's just seeing people not giving up, seeing people think outside the box. For me, that motivates me to do what we're doing here.
I don't want to pick up on something that you said there about being inspired by other people and having such people around you, I suppose. And honestly, when I look at your Facebook photos that you've been posting about your projects, I get a really strong sense of community. And I'm wondering, is that what Nomadic Earth Architecture aims to be about community and the difference community makes?
Definitely. That's right up there with education and community. Those, I think, are our two top concepts in the work that we do. Community just gives so much insight into working better, working more efficiently, more cost effectively, but also in the communities that we work with these workshops and these spaces where we're building projects with different populations, building together and using your hands, especially for people without experience. It's so transformative to see their confidence boost. They get more creative. They get more excited about participating in certain parts of the project, using certain tools. And that energy kind of is like ignited with all the participants in the workshop. And it wouldn't be the same if it was just James and I out there working, building something. So community just gives you this feeling of confidence and creativity, and that no matter what experience you have, you can still contribute to the project.
I imagine there's a way that once you finish the dwelling or the structure that you're building together, there's a way in which community has sort of been built into the bones of the place, right? Everyone knows that that is their project. They did this together. And ideally, maybe there's multiple buildings that have been built together. It just seems to me that almost you're building artifacts of community. Is that off base?
Not at all. And a lot of these buildings are used as ceremonial spaces or people congregating together for different workshops or classes or things, because it was such a profound experience to build. It has this energy in it. And a lot of the buildings we build are round domes. And that too, the shape of the whole building creates kind of this energetic field, and it's kind of a powerful space. And then when you add on top of that you did it with your hands, with the earth beneath your feet, it really brings the people that were involved together. And that connection, those relationships spread out into their own lives and the rest of the people that they work with in other circles. So it's really powerful. And we feel really lucky to be able to connect with all of these really interesting people.
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. James, let me ask you about your outlook for the future. Where do you find your motivation to do the work that you do?
I think it's promising. I find my motivation from young people. I've had the chance to work with a lot of interns that are in their early 20s and stuff, and just to see how they spark up once they learn about the natural building and all the toxicities and stuff like that and other types of building materials. And then they actually get to do it with their hands. It's a sense of they're proud because it's like this huge piece of art, technically is what it is. Each one is individually made by hand. It's a giant piece of art and it's on display. Now they have something that they can be proud of.
Earth Keepers has listeners from all over the world, and they tend to be interested in ways that we can be better agents of healing and change in the realm of earth care. What encouragement would you want to offer listeners, maybe particularly young listeners, and what do you hope they might take away from our conversation?
I would say find yourself a quest for healthy living and knowledge, and set out on that quest and see what you can come up with and what ideas you can bring to the table, and find a community of like-minded people so that you can sit down and actually conversate with people and share ideas and knowledge. And then you can go in your separate ways and find other ideas and knowledge and come back and share those ideas and knowledge so that you can reciprocate.
Jesse?
I think I'm going to give them the same advice that you gave me, and it has stuck with me this whole time. And it's just to follow your curiosity, that we can all have an effect on other people, on our environment, on our future. We don't have to have fancy qualifications or years and years of experience. You just have to have curiosity.
We've been in conversation with James Sledge and Jesse Nathanson of Nomadic Earth Architecture. To learn more about their work, you'll find helpful links in this episode's show notes. You'll also find information there about the International Community Development Master's Program. I am Forrest Inslee, your podcast host. Our executive producer is James Amadon, and our producer is Dave Wolfers. Timothy Connor is our editor, and Forrest Reed is the creator of our original music. Our research assistant is Colleen Meggerly, and Jesselyn Gentry is our social media director. Thank you, friends, for listening, and please join us for our next conversation on the Earth Keepers podcast.